The first rays of sunlight spilled over the Pacific horizon, cutting through the mist that hugged the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound in California. The air smelled of salt, wet earth, and sweat, a scent ingrained in the lungs of every SEAL who had ever stepped foot here. Men in camo shorts and training t-shirts were already moving through their morning drills, leaping over walls, swinging across monkey bars, sprinting across muddy terrain. The compound had seen hundreds of recruits, hundreds of men tested against every limit imaginable. But that morning something, or rather someone, was about to turn the routine on its head. A black SUV rolled to a stop outside the main gate. Its tires crunched over gravel, and the vehicle's engine hummed with quiet authority. The SEALs barely looked up from their exercises until the doors opened. Out stepped Lieutenant Riley, a figure that didn't quite fit the usual profile of those who trained here. Not taller than average, not overly muscular, yet her posture radiated a discipline so precise it drew attention instantly. Dark hair was pulled into a tight braid. Eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the compound with a focus that could cut through steel. Men paused mid-jump. Whispers traveled like wildfire. "Who's that?" one murmured. Another smirked. "Probably a civilian tagging along." Riley didn't flinch. She adjusted the strap on her backpack, revealing a toned frame that hinted at countless hours of preparation. She approached the obstacle course where several seasoned SEALs were mid-drill. One of them, a burly man with arms like coiled steel cables, called out, smirking, "You sure you belong here, rookie?" Without missing a beat, Riley tilted her head, eyes meeting his with calm defiance. "Mind if I try?" she said. Her voice was soft, yet carried a weight that drew all attention. A ripple of laughter spread across the compound. The idea of a young woman stepping onto the same course these men had dominated for years was almost comical. Yet her calm, unshakable demeanor planted a seed of unease. The whistle blew. SEALs surged forward, muscles rippling, mud splashing with each powerful step. Riley followed, moving differently, not faster at first but with a fluidity, a rhythm that suggested precision over raw force. She timed her jumps perfectly, grabbed each rope with calculated strength, and swung across bars with a gymnast's grace. The instructors, usually stoic and unmoved, leaned forward in their seats. The men, initially smug and confident, began exchanging glances they didn't know how to interpret. When Riley approached the final wall, 7 feet of slick, unforgiving wood, the SEALs stopped mid-watch. This was the moment most faltered, the obstacle that separated the good from the elite. Riley's hand gripped the top, fingers flexing, muscles taut. A fraction of a second passed. Then, with an explosive surge, she vaulted over the wall. Silence fell. Not a single smirk remained. The men who had mocked her mere minutes ago were frozen, jaws slack, eyes wide. Even the instructors exchanged silent nods of surprise. But Riley's gaze wasn't on them. From the corner of her eye, a shadow lingered at the edge of the compound, just beyond the rows of training rigs. Someone was watching. She didn't know who or why, but instinct prickled down her spine. This was no ordinary training day. The whispers resumed, quieter this time, tinged with disbelief. "Did you see that?" She made it look effortless. Yet Riley didn't speak, didn't boast. She only adjusted her braid, took a steady breath, and moved toward the next obstacle. No one knew it yet, but the day had only just begun, and whatever was coming next would test far more than speed or strength. The question hung in the air. Who was she really, and how far could she go by mid-morning? The compound buzzed with whispers and sideways glances. Riley had completed the first segment of the obstacle course, and the SEALs, men who had trained for years to push past pain and fear, were watching her like a phenomenon they couldn't quite categorize. Some were impressed. Others, quietly angry at being by someone so young and seemingly untested. Riley's next challenge was the infamous monkey bar gauntlet, a stretch of swinging bars, ropes, and narrow beams designed to break the strongest grip and test every ounce of upper body strength and endurance. Seals had told stories of men collapsing midway, of scraped knuckles, torn muscles, and humiliation. For her, it was another puzzle, a sequence of motions to master, rhythm to find. As she approached the gauntlet, the seasoned seals smirked and whispered bets. She'll fall on the second bar. Watch her flail on the rope. But the instant Riley gripped the first bar, silence fell. Her movements were precise, almost poetic. Each swing transferred power seamlessly, each jump perfectly calculated. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion, only efficiency, focus, and a confidence that unnerved her observers. Halfway through, a young seal muttered under his breath, "She's faster than any of us." Heads turned. Eyes widened. Even the instructors, usually immune to surprises, leaned in, their expressions caught between astonishment and disbelief. Riley's breathing was steady, controlled, even as sweat streamed down her face, mixing with the grime of mud and rain from an earlier drizzle. Her hands were raw, her forearms screaming, but she didn't falter. Every muscle, every sinew was tuned to perfection. Then came the final rope ascent, a single vertical rope, slick and daunting, that required explosive upper body strength. Normally, this was the part where men pushed past exhaustion with sheer force, often faltering under pressure. Riley paused for a heartbeat, her eyes scanning the top of the rope. The seals held their collective breath. With a single, fluid motion, she leaped, caught the rope, and propelled herself upward with a force that seemed almost unnatural. Fingers clenched, arms locked, she pulled herself higher, every inch a battle of gravity against precision. When her hand finally touched the top pad, the compound fell silent. Not a cheer, not a gasp, just stunned awe. For a moment, Riley stood at the summit, chest heaving, soaked in sweat and mud, surveying the men who had been mocking her less than an hour ago. Their smirks had vanished. Faces were pale. Pride and disbelief wrestled for control. Then something caught Riley's eye, a movement at the edge of the compound, a shadow slipping between the training rigs, too deliberate to be random. Her stomach clenched. Someone had been watching, tracking her every move. The adrenaline surged anew, but this time with an edge of unease. "Who are you?" she whispered under her breath, but the figure remained unseen, just out of reach. The instructors exchanged knowing looks, but none dared speak. Even Commander Davis, the retired SEAL legend who often visited the compound, had appeared at a distance, silent, evaluating her as if trying to measure her potential, not just as a soldier but as something extraordinary. Riley didn't have time to wonder. She dropped down from the rope, landing with the precision of a predator, ready for whatever the next obstacle would throw at her. The SEALs followed, some in disbelief, others in quiet determination, now motivated by the girl who had just shattered their expectations. As she prepared to move on, a faint whistle echoed across the compound, not the standard training signal. Riley froze, muscles taut, senses sharp. That faint, almost imperceptible sound was a warning. This day was about to change. And in that instant, she realized it wasn't just about breaking records anymore. Someone somewhere was testing her, and they had far higher stakes in mind than she could yet imagine. By noon, the compound was alive with whispers, quiet murmurs that carried across the mud-slick training fields. Word had spread. The girl, Riley, wasn't just keeping pace with the SEALs. She was surpassing them. Men who had laughed at her only hours before now watched with wide eyes, some muttering under their breath, others refusing to look directly, as if acknowledging her prowess might shatter their own sense of identity. The next challenge was the endurance gauntlet, a brutal combination of rope climbs, weighted carries, and wall scaling that only the elite had ever completed under the record time. The SEALs lined up, tense, competitive, but Riley didn't join them. She had no need for bravado. Instead, she studied the course as though it were a puzzle. Every knot, every grip, every slippery wooden wall was already mapped in her mind. When the whistle blew, the men surged forward with raw power, muscles bulging, feet pounding the muddy ground. Riley started behind them, letting their momentum carry the attention, their confidence, their arrogance. Then, with a precision leap onto the first rope, she moved, calculated, graceful, explosive. The seals faltered. One slipped mid-swing. Another paused, chest heaving, gritting teeth at the speed she displayed. Riley moved past them like a shadow, arms pumping, legs snapping with a predator's precision. Her breathing remained steady, almost unnaturally calm, as though every muscle, every heartbeat was synchronized with an internal metronome that no one else could hear. At the halfway point, the men began to notice the impossible. She was not just matching them, she was beating them. She swung past the weighted carries, lifted the heavy sandbags with a controlled strength that made the seasoned seals pause mid-stride. Every observer froze. Even the instructors, standing back with clipboards and folded arms, exchanged glances heavy with disbelief. Then came the final wall, the last challenge before the record board. A 7-foot vertical monolith, slick from morning drizzle with ropes hanging like serpents. Every seal had fallen here at least once. Some had walked away, defeated, bloodied knuckles evidence of the impossible task. Riley approached it, eyes narrowing, focusing. Her hand gripped the first rope, muscles coiled. And then, explosive, fluid, perfect, she surged upward. The wall yielded to her strength. Her fingertips brushed the top pad and she vaulted over, landing lightly on the muddy ground below. Silence. The compound went still. Not a clap, not a shout, not a breath of disbelief. It was a heavy, stunned quiet that pressed against the chest. The men who had smirked, laughed, and mocked her earlier now stood frozen, slack-jawed, staring at a reality they couldn't accept. Riley had shattered the unofficial record, the one they had boasted about for years, the one they had thought untouchable. Then came the slow, deliberate clap. From the shadows, Commander Davis emerged. The retired SEAL legend's face was unreadable, but his eyes, cold, calculating, discerning, held a rare respect. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply nodded once. That single gesture, weighty with decades of experience, carried more approval than any medal or accolade could. Riley's chest heaved, but she didn't exhale fully. Something pricked at the back of her neck, a sensation she had felt before. The shadow she had glimpsed earlier at the edge of the course hadn't disappeared. Someone had been watching every move she made, tracking her, calculating her. Her eyes darted toward the edge of the compound. The figure remained, elusive, shrouded. Riley didn't know who they were or why they were there, but instinctively she knew that this day, these records, were only the beginning. The seals had been silenced. The crowd had been awed. But Riley, standing in mud and sweat, felt the first twinge of unease. Some battles were physical. Others were waiting just beyond the shadows. The question lingered in the air, heavier than applause or awe. Who was watching her? And what would happen when they finally stepped out of the shadows? The afternoon sun had burned away the morning mist, leaving the compound slick with mud, sweat, and tension. Riley stood at the edge of the course, muscles still quivering from her record-breaking run. The seals, normally a wall of unshakable confidence, now hovered around her with a mix of awe, disbelief, and grudging respect. Yet Riley sensed a new tension in the air, one that had nothing to do with her speed or strength. A grizzled SEAL, his face lined from years of desert heat and combat, approached her quietly. His voice was low, almost threatening. "You're fast," he said, eyes narrowing. "But can you handle this?" He didn't explain. Instead, he led her to a narrow side path, overgrown and unmarked, one that Riley hadn't noticed before despite her careful scanning of the compound. The path led to an area that didn't appear on any of the training maps, a hidden course, designed not for records, but for testing the mind and body beyond all limits. Walls loomed slick with mud, ropes hung frayed and threatening, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and the terrain itself seemed designed to strip away confidence, leaving only raw endurance. This was no ordinary obstacle course. It was a gauntlet for the elite, for those who could push through exhaustion and fear simultaneously. Riley stepped forward, her instincts on high alert. Sweat still coated her body from the earlier run, but her muscles were already tightening, preparing for what was coming. She adjusted her braid, took a deep breath, and began. The first obstacle, a swinging rope ladder over a pit of rocks, tested grip, balance, and nerve. She moved carefully but with speed, her feet finding the narrow rungs with uncanny precision. Halfway across, the rope shifted under a sudden gust of wind, and Riley's heart skipped. She steadied herself instantly, a flicker of tension flashing across her eyes. Next came a wall climb, its surface slick from the morning drizzle. Muscles screamed, forearms burned, and yet she ascended with a fluidity that seemed almost impossible. Every step, every pull was calculated, deliberate, perfect. The SEALs who had followed her remained silent, almost afraid to speak, watching as the young lieutenant pushed herself beyond what they had ever done. But halfway through the course, Riley froze. A faint whistle echoed through the trees, a sound too deliberate, too precise to be part of standard training. Her senses heightened. Someone had been observing her, not casually but intently. Every movement she made had been tracked, analyzed. She paused, muscles taut, listening. The forest seemed alive with hidden eyes. The whistle came again, faint but cutting, and she realized the truth. This was no ordinary test. Someone somewhere had orchestrated this challenge, not for training, not for records, but to see how far she could endure under pressure. For a moment, doubt flickered across her mind. She had dominated the physical challenges before, but this was different. This was psychological. Every step, every breath carried the weight of observation, expectation, and something else, something unknown. Yet Riley didn't hesitate. She tightened her grip, adjusted her footing, and pressed forward, refusing to let fear dictate her pace. Her mind sharpened, focusing not on what might happen but on what must happen: survive, conquer, prove herself. As she approached the next obstacle, a narrow beam over a pit of water, the wind howled through the trees and a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. The compound had witnessed her strength, her speed, her precision. But this challenge, the hidden gauntlet, the silent observer, was the beginning of a deeper test, one that would stretch Riley further than she had ever imagined. And in that moment, standing on the edge of the beam, heart hammering, she knew. The true test wasn't just about breaking records. It was about surviving what no one else could see coming. Night had fallen over the compound, and the training fields lay quiet beneath the pale light of the moon. Riley sat on the edge of her bunk, muscles aching, mud crusted on her fatigued skin, mind buzzing from the day's trials. The record-breaking runs, the hidden gauntlet, the impossible obstacles, it was all too much for most people. For Riley, it was exhilarating. But there was something else, gnawing quietly at the back of her mind. She wasn't alone. Her instincts, honed through years of disciplined training and relentless preparation, told her someone had been watching her every move. Not casually, not by accident. They were observing, analyzing, calculating, and that thought made her skin prickle. The phone in her bunk room vibrated lightly, but it wasn't a phone. It was the simple knock at her door that carried the weight of authority and unease. Riley rose slowly, muscles tense, and opened it to find two senior SEAL instructors standing in the doorway. Normally intimidating, they now looked uneasy. Without a word, one of them handed her a manila envelope. Riley's eyes flicked to them, searching for explanation. None came. The envelope was heavy, thick with the weight of what it might contain. She tore it open, and a single line, written in black ink on plain paper, caught her eye. "Next time it won't be training." Her heart skipped, her grip tightened on the paper. The message wasn't a challenge. It was a warning, a threat. Someone knew her capabilities. Someone knew she could break records, but now they were signaling that this was bigger than skill, bigger than endurance. Riley sank back onto her bunk, letting the words sink in. Questions raced through her mind. Who had sent this? Commander Davis? The instructors? Or the shadow she had glimpsed at the edge of the course earlier, the one who seemed to follow her every move without being seen? Whoever it was, the message was clear. The next test would not be a controlled environment. It would be real, dangerous, unforgiving. Sleep did not come easily. Her body ached, but her mind refused to rest. She replayed every move, every jump, every rope climb from the day, searching for weaknesses, for signs of what might come next. Every sound in the compound made her ears sharpen. Every flicker of shadow set her senses on edge. By morning, she had made a decision. Fear could not control her, not now, not ever. She would continue, she would excel, and she would face whatever was coming with the same focus and precision that had brought her this far. The seals were talking again, though now their voices carried a mix of awe and apprehension. "Did you see her today?" one whispered. "She's not just breaking records, she's rewriting them." Another added, quieter, "And someone's watching her." Riley knew they were right. The shadow was still out there, the observer still waiting. The message had confirmed it. This wasn't about winning a course anymore, it was about survival. And yet, despite the fear, a flicker of excitement ran through her. For the first time, the stakes were real. The challenge was no longer about proving herself to the men who doubted her. It was about proving herself to the unknown force that had decided she was worthy of testing. She rose from the bunk, stripped off the remnants of mud, and tightened her gear. The day ahead would demand every ounce of strength, every shred of focus she had. As she stepped out into the morning light, Riley glanced toward the edge of the compound, toward the area where shadows lingered, and whispered under her breath, "Bring it on." The wind carried a faint, almost imperceptible whistle in response, or maybe it was just her imagination. Either way, Riley knew one thing for certain: the game had changed. The observer was no longer hidden. The challenge was no longer just training, and whatever came next, it would push her farther than she had ever imagined. The morning fog clung to the compound like a ghost, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and salt. Riley tightened the straps of her gloves, shoulders coiled with anticipation. Today wasn't just another record attempt. She could feel it in every fiber of her body. Something had changed. The energy around the compound was different, tense, watchful, almost predatory. As she approached the starting line of the obstacle course, a helicopter hovered silently overhead. Its dark silhouette cast long, shifting shadows across the mud-streaked ground. Whispers rippled through the seals. "Surprise exercise," someone muttered, but Riley didn't need speculation. The moment she scanned the perimeter, she saw the signs of intrusion. Footprints in the mud that didn't match any of the trainees, movements in the trees that didn't belong to birds, subtle disturbances that screamed of deliberate tracking. Halfway through the course, Riley's instincts went into overdrive. She vaulted over a wall, her boots landing with a muted splash in the mud, and froze. Footprints, too large, too deliberate to be random. Someone had been here following her. Her heartbeat spiked, but she didn't falter. Every training drill, every physical feat had taught her control under pressure. This was different. This was tactical awareness at its. A faint voice crackled through the compound's loudspeakers. "Riley, stop. This isn't what it looks like." Her head snapped toward the source, but there was no one in sight. The seals glanced at each other, confusion and unease written across their faces. Riley's gut tightened. Whoever was out there wasn't playing by the rules of the training course. This was reconnaissance, observation. Something, or someone, was testing her for reasons she didn't yet understand. Her pace quickened. The remaining obstacles were designed to push her physical limits: rope climbs, wall vaults, weighted carries. But Riley's mind was acutely aware of the invisible presence. Every sound, every movement, every shadow demanded attention. Her body moved with precision born of instinct, her muscles firing in perfect sequence. At the monkey bar gauntlet, her hand slipped slightly on the slick metal. Instantly, a cold awareness hit her. This course was no longer about strength or speed alone. Every misstep could mean exposure, a chance for the hidden observer to gain an advantage, or worse. She recalibrated mid-swing, swinging with a newfound vigilance that kept her ahead of the unseen threat. By the time she reached the final wall, her breaths came shallow but controlled. She knew the observer was still there, silent, watching. Riley gripped the rope, every sinew taut, and propelled herself upward. As her hands touched the top pad and she vaulted over, the shadow finally revealed itself, at least in part. A figure moved along the perimeter of the course just out of reach, scanning her like a predator assessing prey. Riley's eyes met theirs for a split second, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Not respect. Not camaraderie. Recognition that she was no ordinary challenger. The seals who had been keeping pace fell silent, unsure how to react. Riley landed lightly, chest heaving, mud and sweat coating her body like armor. She didn't glance at the others. Her attention was on the edge of the compound, where the shadow had disappeared into the trees. Whoever this was, they had been orchestrating more than tests. They were sending a message. And Riley knew, deep down, that the true challenge was just beginning. This observer wasn't here to watch her succeed or fail. They were here to see how far she could survive, how far she could push when the rules didn't exist, and when danger was real. Riley clenched her fists, eyes narrowing. "Bring it on," she whispered under her breath. Because one thing was certain, she had survived every test so far. But now the stakes were higher than records, higher than prestige, higher than anyone could imagine. This was no longer a course. This was a game, and the shadow held all the cards. The morning sun burned through the lingering fog, casting sharp golden streaks across the compound. Riley stood at the starting line of the final course, her muscles tight, heart pounding, not just from anticipation, but from the knowledge that today was unlike any other. This wasn't about records anymore. This was about proving herself when every ounce of strength, skill, and instinct would be tested to its limit. The course was designed for teams, brutal and punishing, with walls taller than men, ropes slick from the morning dew, weighted carries that would flatten anyone unprepared, and a final gauntlet that demanded speed, endurance, and mental acuity in equal measure. Riley didn't hesitate. She would run it solo. The seals tried to protest. "It's impossible, you can't." A voice started, but Riley cut it off with a single nod. She had faced doubt all her life, and nothing and no one would stop her now. The whistle blew, sharp and slicing through the morning air. Riley exploded forward, her boots hitting the ground with the rhythm of a predator. The first obstacles fell beneath her with a fluidity that left the watching seals slack-jawed. Rope climbs, wall vaults, weighted carries. She tackled each with precision, her breathing steady, her movements economical and calculated. But this time, the invisible observer was not just watching, they were testing her. Halfway through the course, she noticed subtle anomalies: ropes slightly frayed, walls slicked with extra mud, weighted bags heavier than they should have been. Someone had intentionally increased the difficulty, pushing her to extremes. Riley adjusted instantly. Her eyes narrowed, her body coiling with a predator's focus. Every swing, every step, every lift was timed with perfect precision. Her muscles screamed, yet she ignored the pain, channeling every ounce of energy into the single goal: complete the course. At the final gauntlet, the obstacle that had defeated even the most seasoned seals, Riley paused for a heartbeat. The entire compound seemed to hold its breath. Then she saw him, Commander Davis, standing at the finish line. But this wasn't just observation. He was a competitor this time. His presence added weight to the challenge, a silent test of whether Riley could excel not just against the course, but against a legend who had mastered it all. Riley lunged forward. Every motion was explosive yet controlled. Her hands gripped the slick bars with perfect form, swinging, climbing, vaulting with the precision of someone who had trained for a lifetime compressed into these moments. Commander Davis watched, expression unreadable, eyes sharp. But for the first time, there was a flicker of surprise as Riley closed the gap faster than anyone had ever done. The finish line loomed. Sweat stung her eyes. Muscles burned like molten steel. And then, in a final surge, Riley propelled herself over the last wall, landing with perfect balance. The compound was silent. Not a cheer, not a gasp, just awe. The seals stared, unable to reconcile what they had witnessed. Riley had not only completed the impossible solo course but had done it faster than anyone, legend or trainee. Commander Davis approached, slow, deliberate. He extended his hand, but it wasn't just a gesture of acknowledgement. It was recognition of equal caliber, of respect earned through fire and grit. Riley grasped it, the grip firm and unwavering. And then in the distance, a flicker of movement caught her eye. The shadow, the observer who had followed her every step, was there again, watching from beyond the compound. Riley clenched her fists, breath heavy but controlled. She had conquered the course, earned respect, shattered records, but the game was far from over. The final words hung in the humid morning air. The observer wasn't finished. Neither was the challenge. Riley's eyes narrowed. Her victory was complete, but the real test, the one that would demand courage beyond the physical, was only just beginning. The final day of the training cycle had arrived, and the compound shimmered under the crisp dawn light. Mud and sweat still clung to Riley's skin, evidence of days spent pushing herself beyond limits no one thought possible. Around her, SEALs lined up, glances mingling awe, envy, and disbelief. But Riley's eyes were fixed on one target, the last obstacle, the final measure of skill, endurance, and resolve. The course had been designed for teams, but Riley had insisted on running it solo. Commander Davis, the retired SEAL legend who had quietly observed her since day one, now stood at the finish line not as a spectator but as a benchmark. His eyes were steady, unreadable, yet sharp enough to challenge anyone who dared meet them. This wasn't just a race against the course. It was a test of legacy, precision, and nerve. The whistle cut through the cool morning air, sharp and commanding. Riley exploded forward, her body moving with uncanny precision. Every swing, every vault, every rope climb was executed with the fluidity of someone who had mastered the impossible. Her breathing was steady, her focus absolute, even as muscles screamed, tendons burned, and the mud beneath her boots threatened to unbalance her. Halfway through, she felt the familiar tug of the unknown, the shadow that had haunted her progress throughout the week. At the edge of her vision, just beyond the compound's line of sight, a figure moved deliberately, studying her every move. Riley's instincts flared. This wasn't casual observation anymore. Whoever it was had a purpose, a reason she couldn't yet guess, and she would be ready for it. The final obstacle loomed, a 7-foot wall slick with mud, ropes dangling like serpents. Men who had trained here for years stumbled and faltered at this point. Riley's eyes narrowed. Commander Davis watched from above, an immovable standard of excellence. Every muscle in her body coiled, every breath measured. She leaped, fingers clinging to the rope, arms straining, legs pumping with explosive force. In a single perfect motion, she vaulted over the top and landed squarely on the other side, chest heaving, eyes burning. The compound fell silent, not a cheer, not a gasp, just stunned awe. The SEALs, once skeptics and mockers, now stared speechless. Riley had not only completed the impossible solo course but had done it faster than anyone, legend or trainee. Commander Davis approached, slow, deliberate. He extended his hand, the weight of decades of experience in his firm grip. Riley grasped it without hesitation. The gesture spoke volumes. Respect earned, equality recognized, a bond forged through trial and fire. For a long moment the compound seemed frozen in time. Riley's gaze swept across the men who had doubted her, the observers, the instructors. Then in the far distance, the shadow that had haunted her all week reappeared just beyond the tree line. Riley's eyes locked on it, and she felt a shiver of anticipation mixed with resolve. Whoever had been watching, whoever had sent cryptic warnings, whoever had orchestrated the hidden tests, they were still out there. But Riley didn't flinch. She had faced every challenge, shattered every record, and earned the respect of the best-trained soldiers in the country. Her body ached, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She straightened her back, shoulders squared, and whispered under her breath, "Let's see what you've got." The SEALs remained silent, no longer mocking, no longer doubting. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A young lieutenant, relentless and unyielding, who had shattered their expectations and proven herself against impossible odds. Respect replaced disbelief, or replaced ridicule. Riley didn't celebrate, didn't smile. There was no need. She knew the records were just numbers, the courses just obstacles. What mattered was the fire within, the unbroken focus, and the knowledge that she could face anything, physical, mental, or unseen. As the shadow receded into the distance, Riley's eyes followed it, mind racing with possibilities. One thing was certain, the day's victories were hers. But the true challenges, the ones that tested courage, instinct, and survival, were only beginning. And in the quiet, golden light of dawn, the SEALs finally understood. Riley was not just a record breaker. She was a force, a storm waiting to strike, and the world had better take notice.